a soft landing on the south side of the moon. It is indeed a historic moment. ISRO prove its ability that it can compete with the very best in the world in space technology? Will it prove to be third time lucky for the Chandrayaan 3 mission? Now, particularly so because just a couple of days ago, you saw the Luna 25 mission by the Russian space agency, which crashed into the moon, into the lunar surface. So what does this moment mean for Indian space technology, for the Indian Space Research Organization, and for India's scientific prowess at a time when the entire world seems to be recognizing and acknowledging India's growing stature as a scientific power? All right, so let's first tell you about this 42-day-long journey. Now, the takeoff, it happened in July, exactly in the middle of July. On the 14th of July is when the takeoff happened from the Sriharikota Space Center, the Satish Dhawan Space Center in Sriharikota. That's when the takeoff of the Chandrayaan began. This was exactly the middle of July. The first milestone happened the very next day, which was the first orbit-raising maneuver of the rocket and the equipment it was carrying, the lander, rover, and of course the propulsion equipment. The milestone 2, which happened on the 1st of August, a full 2 weeks after that it was inserted, the Chandrayaan 3 was inserted into the trans-lunar orbit, into the orbit of the moon. Milestone 3 happened 5 days after that is, that it got inserted into the lunar orbit. Then after that, a good 10 days after that, on the 14th of August, just before Independence Day, there was milestone 4, which was in the orbit circulation phase. This is around the moon. And then there was milestone 5, which happened just last week, where the lander propulsion module separated from the Vikram lander and the rover that it's carrying. So the propulsion phase was over. The separation happened on the 17th of August. Then on the 18th of August, the very next day, there was the first deboosting maneuver which was completed, which is basically reducing the distance between the lander and rover from the moon's surface. And then, of course, there was a second deboosting that happened just a couple of days ago. So it's been a landmark journey over the last month plus. Remember, it began all the way on the 14th of July. Tomorrow, the 23rd of August, a month and 10 days almost later, will a successful soft landing happen? So, what happens next? That is the million-dollar question. That is the question that's top on everybody's mind. Now, Vikram, carrying the rover Pragyan, it will attempt a landing on the south side of the moon. A soft landing on the south side. No other space agency, no other country has attempted that. The Russians tried a couple of days ago. Unfortunately, that mission failed. The attempt, like I said, is to land on the soft side, on the south side of the moon. Mostly all the other moon missions, the American mission, NASA, the earlier Soviet mission, the Chinese mission, which happened a few years ago, all of it was on the equator and the equatorial region of the moon. This is the first attempt to land on the dark side or on the south side of the moon. A series of complex braking maneuvers. Basically, over the last week to 10 days, what's been happening is to try and reduce the speed at which the lander equipment is moving towards the lunar surface. Remember last time in Chandrayaan 2, it was in the very final stage of the braking maneuver that it failed and it crash landed into the lunar surface. Now, the rover, which is named Pragyan, will then come out of the lander, the Vikram lander. You can see the rover here. The rover will then explore the surface of the moon. It will roll off onto the surface of the moon. It will explore the nearby lunar area. The landing area is about 4 meters long, is what we are told. It will explore the nearby lunar area, look for any possible signs of life, as it were, ions, electrons, etc. It will gather images which will be sent back to the Earth. Now, interestingly, the orbiter from the previous mission, the Chandrayaan 2, that is the first sort of interface to which the rover will be sending these images and whatever other data it collects. And then the Chandrayaan 2's orbiter is the one that will be sending it back to the Earth station. Now, this is the role of the rover, which is Pragyan. What about the role of the lander, which is Vikram? And mind you, this is the toughest part of the maneuver. This is where Chandrayaan 2 had failed. Vikram, which carries Pragyan, the rover, will attempt to land a soft landing on the south side of the moon. Now, this is named after Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, the legendary scientist who was the head of ISRO, who in fact started ISRO. The total weight of the lander is over 1,000 kilograms. It's in fact over 1,700 kilograms heavy. That's the weight of the lander. It is designed for a soft landing, which means that at the time of impact, it has to reduce its speed to almost near zero, because otherwise it will crash. Now, what the rover will also do is to try and descend. Once this landing successfully happens on the south side of the moon, the rover will successfully come out of the lander equipment, which is Vikram. Pragyan has 6 wheels. It also has a tricolor which will be implanted on its front side. It will also have a logo of ISRO which will be placed on that rover. It will then be placed on the lunar surface after about 4 hours. The rover Pragyan will be there on the lunar surface for about 1 lunar day, which is approximately 2 weeks. The rover will travel at a speed of 1 centimeter per second. It will try, and in fact the weight of the rover is just a shade under 30 kilograms. It has 2 payloads that the rover is carrying. It will scan the lunar surface with navigation cameras that are in place on it. Like I said, its mission life is that of 1 lunar day, which is 14 Earth days, through which it will be sending back some of all the information and data collected back to the Earth. Now, why is this such a big deal? Now, remember, India is among a set of very few countries. Only 3 other countries have attempted a moon mission, have successfully landed on the moon. And that includes the United States, of course, the first very moon mission, which was in 1969, the Neil Armstrong mission. Then subsequently, the former Soviet Union also had successful moon landings. And then, of course, there was China, which in the last decade or so has attempted at least 3 landing maneuvers on the moon. But why India's attempt tomorrow will be so special is because, like I said, this is the first time that any country, any mission is attempting to land on the south side of the moon. That's the dark side. That's the side of the moon we have least information about. All the attempts before, and there have been close to 20 attempts, all the attempts before have been on the middle part of the moon, near the equatorial region of the moon. Tomorrow will be the first time that a country will successfully attempt to make a soft landing on the south side of the moon. So, it is a historic mission, no doubt about it. The years and years of hard work have gone into the making of this mission. And yes, ISRO has learned its lessons from the last 2 times, particularly the last time when it crash landed at the very last minute, within the last 2 or 3 minutes or so, when it couldn't brake enough to reduce its speed to almost near zero in a way to enable soft landing, and thereby it crashed onto the moon's surface. Now, let's try and make sense of this. What are we expecting tomorrow? Why is it a big deal if indeed Chandrayaan 3 will become a successful mission and Vikram will make a soft landing on the south side of the moon? Dr. M. Annadurai is former director at ISAC in ISRO. Dr. Amitabh Ghosh is a space scientist associated formerly with NASA. Annapurni Subramaniam is director at the Indian Institute of Astrophysics. And Professor Y.S. Rajan is joining us. He's former ISRO scientist as well. So thank you very much. Very esteemed panel joining us. We've got less than 24 hours to look forward to this historic landing. Let me start with you, Dr. Annadurai. Why is tomorrow such an important day? If there were to be this successful soft landing tomorrow, we're expecting the time to be between 5:45 and 6:05. Why would it be such a big deal in the scientific community, in the space technology world?
Yeah, in short, you recall 60s and 70s, nearly 40, 50 years back, the moon race was there as a peak of the Russia in US conflict point of view. But now after this big gap of 40, 50 years, back to the moon is a big campaign has come, thanks to the discovery of water on the moon by Chandrayaan 1. When that happens, definitely the back to the moon is a big rush is happening towards the polar region of the moon, where the discovery of water moon has been identified. Now, as a follow-on, good missions are coming. And in that case, now we have started the seed. I think when we are making a soft landing on this unknown terrain, that will maintain the lead, whatever we have taken. And possibly it can open up the various possibilities in the future when the whole internationally people are looking for the moon in a different way. And that way, I think that tomorrow's soft landing will keep India in the edge, even though we started late. I think that will enable us to be in the forerunner in the second attempts what we are going for the moon in the name of back to the moon.
I also want to go across to Amitabh Ghosh. Now, one of the things which is rare as far as tomorrow's mission is concerned, and that is that this will be one of the first attempts, in fact, perhaps the first attempt to try and land on the south side of the moon. Why is that so important, and why does that make the mission itself more difficult than what we've seen in the past missions, whether it's by the US or by the erstwhile USSR, or more recently by China?
Soft landing is hard. I'm not sure soft landing at the South Pole is that much harder. So that is one thing which is going on. Is the first part of your answer is we are going back, as in the world, like NASA, and as part of the Artemis program, they're going back to the moon, trying to set up a more permanent settlement, not as an exploration mission like in the Apollo days. So imagine if you were to go to America and you did not have water available in America or return fuel available from America, you have to carry everything from Delhi. So that would make your cost that much expensive. So here we need some resources on the moon to make human missions and a human settlement on the moon viable. Where does South Pole come into the picture? There are some craters at the South Pole which are permanently in shade. So they never see sunlight, and so the water never melts. Because otherwise, the moon can get very hot during the lunar day, which is 14 days. So since there is a repository of ice, can you melt that ice and can you extract water and oxygen and hydrogen from it? So where all these missions come into play is we're trying to understand the distribution, the composition, the location of the ice.
Okay.
So that is where these missions become important.
Dr. Annapurni Devi, this is the third attempt of the Chandrayaan. The second attempt failed because in the final few minutes, the lander was not able to slow down enough to make a soft landing on the lunar surface. As a result, it crashed in the final few moments. What are the differences that ISRO has made between Chandrayaan 2 and Chandrayaan 3?
Yeah, so what I hear is that all the tests which has been carried out have taken care of the broader deviations. So there are parameters, and the parameters can deviate. So when you have to take a decision, that decision should be within these parameters. Now, if you broaden these parameters, the decision taken can be, you can also include some adverse conditions.
Okay.
So these margins are included and also tested. and also the onboard software is able to make a more intelligent decision even if the deviations happen. So there are more sensors, but the information from the sensors are required to understand, what is the horizontal speed, the vertical speed, what is the angle with which the spacecraft is moving, and also where it is going to land. It is sloping, or can it actually fall on the four legs, etc. And all these strengthening and the margins which are allowed for deviations are also expanded and well tested. So these conditions give us these kind of testing and simulations give us more confidence in the fact that we will be able to do this feat.
So I believe this time the landing area is also a little wider. It's about 4 meters wide, is what we're given to understand. So maybe that will help as well. I don't know. But let me also ask Professor Y.S. Rajan. Again, I keep coming back to this. Where Chandrayaan 2, met with failure was in the final few minutes, I think in the last 2 minutes or so, where it was not able to brake sufficiently enough to be able to reduce the speed to such a slow level that you can enable a soft landing of the lander. What has changed between Chandrayaan 2 and Chandrayaan 3? What experience has the mission team learned from Chandrayaan 2, which has been incorporated into Chandrayaan 3?
I won't call it a partial failure. There were some anomalies in the last part of the landing. Otherwise, put all this itself is a lot of challenge. But it gave us a lot of lessons. And Chairman ISRO, so I won't be able to explain every detail.
Okay.
Chairman ISRO has explained so much of the details that from between that to this, right from the weight onwards, there are many things. They have added some new things. They have learned some of it. Not only they corrected, they said, okay, oh gosh, I got time. I will change these things.
I also want to know from you, again, I asked this question to one of our earlier panelists as well. Why is the soft landing on the south side, on the southern pole of the moon, why is that harder? Why is that important as well? Because just a few days ago, we saw the Russian mission, Luna 25, which I think was a mission that they had sent to the moon after many, many years. That crashed onto the lunar surface. So explain to our viewers in layman terms why it's particularly difficult, the part of the moon where the landing is being attempted tomorrow.
One thing, I am very sad that the Russian one took place, but it is not during soft landing. India's Chandrayaan 2 was during the soft landing. The Japanese who had failed also was very close to soft landing. Israel, which had also was very close to soft landing. That is different from, unfortunately, but the Russian one, they did not even come to the current maneuver. See, it goes around 110, people would have even fed with 110, 180, 100, like that. From that, they bring it down very close to 25 to 100 or 130 or something like that. Russian thing also was to come to that. It had not come. For coming to that, they tried. So it is in the lunar orbit itself it had done. So coming close, this itself now we have got this is called a second crash brute or something, they call some name. So it has come, it is 25 and 110. Now it will start going down.
So it's 100 by 25. What this means is that at the farthest point from the moon, it's at 100 kilometers, and the closest point to the moon, it's at 25 kilometers. In the last 24 hours, we're told it's basically going down closer to the lunar surface, essentially driven in large part because of lunar gravity. But let me also bring you up to speed as to why those final 15 minutes. It's called the 15 minutes of terror, the last 15 minutes of terror. Why that is so important and why that is where Chandrayaan 2 failed and what changes ISRO has made, this current mission team, Chandrayaan 3, has made to rectify those mistakes. Now, the lander begins its descent towards the moon. It's the final 15 minutes of terror as it's known. It will move at 6,000 kilometers per hour. I mean, it's humanly impossible to fathom that kind of speed. I mean, the fastest Formula One car in the planet goes about 300 kilometers, 300 plus kilometers an hour. This is at 6,000 kilometers an hour. ISRO will give commands from the command center in Bengaluru to the lander. All 4 engines of the lander will then be used. The speed will be reduced, remember, from 6,000 kilometers per hour to just 2 meters per second. And they have to do this in a space of just 15 minutes. The braking maneuver, as it's known, the lander will be in a vertical fine braking phase, which means that the last 15 minutes, it's basically going from 6,000 kilometers per hour to just 2 meters per second. So that is the kind of braking that it needs to do in those final 15 minutes. Dr. Annadurai, if you could just elaborate on that point, how is the braking done? What are the various stages of that braking? And just as I explained, for the human mind to just be able to fathom this, to go from 6,000 kilometers per hour down to 2 meters per second, how is that done?
Yeah, that numbers are fine, but now you look at here that 6,000 kilometer per hour, whatever we are talking about, is a horizontal velocity above the surface of the moon. But now, while we are bringing down this velocity, gravity as the pull, and it is picking up, the vertical velocity is coming up, which was originally not there towards the surface. And now that means beyond some level, the vertical fall also happening. So you have to orient the ladder, which is it was along the velocity vector, just trying to reduce the velocity of horizontal velocity. Now slowly it picks up the vertical velocity. So now you have to kill that also. So it comes a composite orientation, wherein the same thrusters partly will reduce the horizontal velocity, partly will reduce the vertical velocities keep coming. And when it's keep going closer and closer, when the velocity falls, vertical velocity falls, it's keep going closer and closer because of gravity. So then it comes more of a vertical. There is a transition period that's happening there. While doing all these things, it's not only mere velocity numbers, it is also the en route. More and more issue of landing near the, away from the polar region, near the polar regions is, polar regions undulations are very heavy. And now you look at here en route, when we go keep falling down, and we should not by any means en route also you should not hit. Forget about the target. Even before going to the target, keep coming down, you have 6,000 meters height peaks are there. I think we should not get into that. So the route selected also is a hazard-free zone, even beyond the target. So this also put in the system, and that also has onboard system will keep monitoring, ensure that en route also you are okay.
Amitabh Ghosh, you know, just that last 10 or 15 minutes, which is the last sort of minutes of terror as we described it, could you explain, you know, the lunar gravity, which is essentially what is pulling the Vikram lander in the final few minutes? How does that compare with the Earth's gravity, and how does one eventually break to a point where you're able to sort of counteract the lunar gravity down to just 2 meters per second? Dr. Amitabh Ghosh?
Oh, okay. I didn't realize you were asking me the question. So yes. Okay. So something to realize here. It's not a question of just slowing down. It is slowing down when you're just close to the ground, right? So I think a lot of people are. So if you slow down and you're like 500 meters above the ground, then what? Lunar gravity will again take over and accelerate the craft, right? So it's very important to realize that it's just not slowing down. You have to sense you have to sense the ground, and then the automated sequences have to kick in to reduce the velocity at the right height. So that is what is very, very critical.
And in case they're not able to do that, God forbid, if they're not able to reduce the velocity from the right height, if either the velocity is higher at that particular point where it needs to start reducing from, or if it starts reducing from a higher point, like you said, then what happens?
Okay. So let's assume that it reduces the velocity, but it estimates the ground is here. So the spacecraft comes here and then again accelerates. Okay. Let's assume that it thinks that the ground is here, but the ground is actually here. Then it hits the ground at a much higher velocity. Either way, it's a problem. So you have to also detect the ground, and when you come close to the ground, that is when it has to be like 5 feet per second.
Okay. So, Dr. Annapurna Devi, just in terms of, at those final few seconds, the estimation of where the surface is, what is the terrain of that surface? Are there craters? What is the evenness of the surface? All of this, how is this being read by the lander? Are there images? Are there sensors? How does that work?
Yeah, so the Chandrayaan-2 orbiter is out there, and it has actually given high-resolution map of the entire region. So, though the soft landing did not quite succeed in Chandrayaan-2, the orbiter has given immense information, which are actually used to prepare for this particular mission. And these images are already available. That is how the area is selected, and the margins are given for the landing site, etc., etc. On top of that, there is also additional tracers, like sensors, including cameras on board. You would have already seen the lander hazard detection and avoidance camera pictures, which are coming from the other side, the back side of the moon. And so these sensors are already working, and we also have other measurements for altitude meter. All the sensors are out there. And these are the instruments which are specifically there for guiding the last 15 minutes. But over and above, we also find that there are onboard software which can actually guide it through based on the initial information it has got. So the initial parameter with which you are starting the procedure is extremely important, right? So once we know it, the procedures or the maneuvers which are following are already established, and that will be uploaded, yesterday or today. And these apparently can take care of itself to the landing site, but with the initial conditions known. But there are sensors and they will be fine guiding. I also understand that there is a place where it can actually hover. So there is some extra fuel on board. Mm-hmm. So it can spend an extra time there, hovering around and shifting to make sure that it finds the best place of landing. So these are the extra precautions taken for it to make sure that it lands on it makes a soft landing properly.
All right, Dr. Annapurna, I'll come back to you. So, once it lands, like I said, the rover comes out, the rover is there, sort of scanning the surface of the moon, and it'll be sending data back. But what exactly is the mission about? What are they going to explore, and what are they going to relay back to base control in Bengaluru? Now, the possibility of water, remember, Chandrayaan-1 had detected the possibility of water in the permanent shadow. These are shadowy areas which do not receive sunlight, as a result of which there is the ability to have ice formed in some of these shadowy areas. That is the ability to have more water ice. If there is water ice, then there is proof of water, and hence perhaps even proof of life. Now, it's frozen time capsule. The temperatures could be as low as minus 200 degrees. Now, remember, water freezes at 0. If it goes to minus 200, you're basically looking at a solid state substance. It could contain preserved materials as well, stuff that has been frozen in time over hundreds of thousands of years. Now, also, untapped resources could be there, traces of hydrogen, methane, sometimes even sodium, mercury, and silver. These are sources of precious minerals, and it will show the ability of certain regions of the moon to hold on to such precious minerals. Now, the future exploration, it also aids upcoming lunar missions. It will be an ideal pit stop also for missions to the Mars. Remember, it's not just the Chandrayaan that's been announced. The Gaganyans are also there to put a man in space, as well as what is called the Mangalyaan, the space, the race to Mars, as it were, the mission to Mars. that is also there. So this could be an ideal sort of pit stop for what you can expect for future missions. So let me go back to Dr. Anadurai as I get closing comments from our guests. What would be the X factor that you would watch out for, sir, tomorrow, particularly in those final few minutes as it attempts to make the soft landing?
Yeah, I think everything goes fine, and having seen the preparations and preparedness of the onboard hardwares and the ground systems and the mission plans and the programs and the like, I feel fairly hopeful that soft landing will take place. Then the Pragyan, which is kept behind one of the panels, needs to be rolled down. And that also, the panel opening is also after a long time we are opening. So we have to see to that is mechanically opens. Then comes which is kept in a pyro hold condition, the rover being deployed away from the panel, and roller it's rolling down to the ground, and the initial hellos, and I think the whole nation will decide to start with the initial selfies, and beyond that anyhow subsequent days we will be seeing the two instruments from the laser induced as well as alpha source radiation induced systems, and trying to see what are all the mineral chemical composition is concerned. And yeah.
All right. Final word to Dr. Y.S. Rajan. If tomorrow's mission is successful, or let me say, irrespective of the success of tomorrow's mission, how do you perceive the future of ISRO in the realm of space exploration? ISRO already has a long history of putting the satellites of other countries in orbit. We have the manned mission to space. We have the mission to Mars. What is the future trajectory for ISRO?
ISRO has got a lot of things. There are even in the communication. One is Gaganyaan. That is maybe in a couple of years it will take place. Even many of the components for that launch vehicle has been proven in this flight earlier. Not in the lander. It will be in the earlier Bahubali. When that takes place, we are in a great situation. Another very major big milestone. But in addition, there are other planetary. I think immediately following this, soon a mission called Aditya. The name itself suggests it is to study moon, but it is not go to moon. Study sun. It is not going to go to the sun, but from down it can study the sun. That there are so many things to be known. So in space sciences will be done, but it will not be in a very, very major form. There are so many applications, so many other things. Then we need a lot of small satellites. Student satellites 75. Government has now putting it up to now 11 only have been put. So the students are going to do it. And above all, government has opened up this to private sector, so that whichever many things which are routine, ISRO has done so many things, it's not necessary that you have to be doing again.
Okay. All right. Professor Dr. Y.S. Rajan, Dr. Anadurai, Amitav Ghosh, and of course, Dr. Annapurni Devi. Thank you very much for joining us as the entire nation of 1 billion plus and beyond have their eyes fixated on ISRO. It is a big moment for Indian space technology, for all of us Indians, not just for the scientists at ISRO. Joining us now is one such space enthusiast, filmmaker and producer, Vipul Amritlal Shah. Thank you very much, sir, for speaking with us. It's a big moment this for India and India's space program. Everyone is looking forward to the successful soft landing of Chandrayaan 3 of Vikram lander. What are your expectations and what are your wishes to ISRO and its scientists?
India has already registered a huge victory with Chandrayaan 1. Yes, we could not land the rover on that day, and I am praying and hoping that India will achieve it tomorrow. And the most important thing is the progress that India has done in the field of space is absolutely spectacular, and congratulations to ISRO, to everybody who is involved, all our scientists, everybody that has worked tirelessly on this mission, and our leadership, particularly Prime Minister Mr. Modi, for supporting this mission wholeheartedly. I think it's a great achievement for India and a great moment for Indian history. I just hope that we are able to successfully complete the last lap and we are able to create the history. History is anyway created. That would be just cherry on the sundae. It's an unbelievable moment of pride, and I'm sure the whole nation will be up tomorrow at 6 o'clock to watch the most amazing feat that Indian scientists will accomplish tomorrow.
So the fact that only 3 countries have successfully landed missions on the moon, the United States, the former Soviet Union, and China, of course, more recently, India would be just the 4th, and in fact the first to land it on the south side of the moon. How important is that? And that too at a fraction of the cost of other missions. In fact, there are jokes doing the rounds on social media that the entire mission cost of Chandrayaan is less than some big ticket Hollywood movies.
That's a brilliant point that you just made, because this is not just about the present. This is about everybody who is aspiring to be a scientist, and they will want to conquer new heights. They will want to achieve new successes. They will want to achieve much more than what we've already achieved. And as you rightly said, Zaka, sorry, our science program operates as a fractional of a cost. So that is even more reason for us to celebrate that what we are able to achieve as a country in such low cost. So I think this is going to ignite passion in the entire generation to become, even more ambitious and achieve something even bigger. Probably tomorrow, maybe in some years' time, we'll be landing on other planets, or we'll be having huge achievements in the world of space. So this is a milestone moment from that point of view, and this is going to create a path where a lot of people will want to take up research and science as a choice of their career, because it's so glorifying and so beautiful, and the contribution to the country is
I'll
so
get a
massive.
final word from you. Would you consider making a movie on the Chandrayaan, on India's moon mission? I know Hollywood loves space movies, Star Wars and Interstellar and Apollo and all of that. Would you consider one?
It would be amazing to make a film on a success story of Chandrayaan. We had a wonderful film called Mission Mangal, which did talk about the efforts to send the spacecraft to mission to Mangal. So I think yes, that film was very, very well received. It was a huge success. So I think we are also opening up, and as a filmmaker, I would love to make a film on, if there is a, if we are able to achieve the success tomorrow, it will be a it will be a glorious story to narrate to our nation, to see our heroism. And that would be a patriotic film in a very different way, but it would be a wonderful film to make.
Okay, Vipul Amritlal Shah, thank you very much for speaking with us. And we're joining you and billions of Indians and other space enthusiasts around the world. All eyes are on Vikram, and everyone is hoping and praying for a successful landing tomorrow between 5:45 and 6:05. All right, let's shift focus now to the other big story that we're tracking, and that, of course, is the Brics summit, which is officially now underway in South Africa, in Johannesburg. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is currently on a 3-day visit to South Africa to attend the 15th Brics summit. Now, during this visit, he is expected to, of course, hold a meeting with his Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, which, of course, if it happens, would be the first time in 3 years that they are having such a meeting since Galwan. Notably, the relationship between India and China has been strained since the Galwan clashes of 2020. In fact, these are pictures that you saw about a couple of hours ago as the Prime Minister landed in Johannesburg, received there by the Indian community. Remember, this is the second time that the Prime Minister is going to South Africa. This summit, the BRICS summit, marks the first in-person gathering of BRICS leaders since 2019. Since COVID happened, they have not met physically so far. All eyes are on the Prime Minister and whether or not he will be holding talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Like I said, the Indian side has neither confirmed nor denied the possibility of such a meeting, whereas the Chinese ambassador to South Africa told reporters a few days ago that such a meeting was on the cards. But first the story, and then I'll go across to our guests. All right, two guests joining us as we also are counting down to the Prime Minister's speech. He will be speaking at the leaders' retreat any moment now. But Brahma Chelani, Strategic Affairs expert, is joining us, and Professor Victor Gao is Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization and a Professor Chair at the Soochow University. Professor Brahma Chelani, let me start with you first. Do you reckon that there will be these talks? And if there is, what may be the context? Why was it brought about? Because for 3 years, India has been holding off on having these talks because the status quo was changed unilaterally by China, the Galwan clashes happened, and that situation on the ground has still not been resolved.
You raise a very valid question. The fact is that in the 5-year period before the Chinese border aggression in Ladakh in April-May 2020, Modi and Xi Jinping had met 18 times. If 18 meetings did not change Xi Jinping's mind, did not create a more friendly China. On the contrary, those 18 meetings that led to China's border aggression against India, would one meeting in Johannesburg, if it were to happen, if it doesn't happen in Johannesburg, it's likely to happen in New Delhi. But in either case, whether it happens in Johannesburg or in New Delhi, would a Modi-Xi Jinping meeting make any difference? More fundamentally, will it resolve the border crisis that has resulted from China's land grabs in Ladakh in April-May 2020? The Galwan Valley clashes of June 2020 were not the trigger point. They were the consequence of China's border aggression, land grabs of April and May 2020. The issue before China and India is whether they want to mend fences by resolving the border crisis. The border crisis can be resolved only if Xi Jinping is willing to climb down to some extent. After all, this crisis is of China's making. Is China willing to roll back its land grabs? Is it willing to restore status quo ante? Is it willing to do what is necessary to end the crisis, which is to sequentially disengage, de-escalate, and de-induct rival forces? That's the only way this crisis can end.
So, Professor Victor Gao, what has changed on the ground is that you have multiple flashpoints where thousands of Indian and Chinese troops are camped in. There is every passing day the possibility of a flare-up like we saw in Galwan in June 2020. And Professor Chelani is right when he says that it's not India that changed the status quo, it is China that changed the status quo on the ground. Now, if you were to get back to a semblance of a normal relationship, as the foreign minister said, I mean, the relationship right now is not normal. If you want to get back to a semblance of a normal relationship, then China has to go back to the status quo ante as it existed pre-April 2020. Is China willing to do that?
First of all, when we talk about status ante, we need to know what we are talking about. Is it in 2020 or is it before 1962, for example? I've mentioned many times between China and India, there have never been territorial disputes in our thousands of years of history. The territorial disputes now we have were created by the British Indian colonists. And I don't think neither China nor India should be bound by the bad legacies left behind by the British, because they were there in India trying to expand into an imperialist framework, which ended up eventually in disasters. And India achieved its independence. And I think it is time for both China and India to use our wisdom to restore our thousands of years of peaceful coexistence
But,
and
Professor
refuse
Gao,
to be
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting.
The British.
It's rather amusing. It's been 70 plus years since the British left India and since China became the PRC. Are you telling me whatever you perceive as the historical wrongs that happened pre-1947 and pre-1949 were being corrected in 2020?
Now, first of all, in the eastern section of our border, there was this McMahon line drawn up not by Indians, not by the Chinese, but by the British. Now, China has never and will never acknowledge the legality of the McMahon line. Therefore, both China and India need to use our own wisdom to sort out the disputes left behind by the British and refusing to use the McMahon line as the starting point in our negotiations. In the Ladakh region, the circumstances are very different, but one thing is certain. For China and India, war is not an option, and confrontation is the dead end.
Please join me in welcoming the Prime Minister.
Excellencies, leaders of Brics business community, my namaskar, good evening to you all. I am glad that immediately after arriving in South Africa, our very first engagement is the Brics Business Forum. First and foremost, I thank President Ramaphosa for his invitation and for organizing this meeting. My heartiest congratulations and best wishes on the 10th anniversary of the Brics Business Council. In the last 10 years, the Brics Business Council has played a vital role in enhancing our economic cooperation. In 2009, when the first BRICS summit was held, the world was just.
वर्तमान समय में भी कोविड महामारी तनावों और विवादों के बीच विश्व आर्थिक चुनौतियों से जूझ रहा है। ऐसे समय में ब्रिक्स देशों के एक बार फिर महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका है। फ्रेंड्स, वैश्विक अर्थव्यवस्था में उथल-पुथल के बावजूद भारत आज विश्व की फास्टेस्ट ग्रोइंग मेजर इकोनॉमी है। जल्द ही भारत $5 ट्रिलियन इकोनॉमी बन जाएगा। इस बात में कोई संदेह नहीं कि आने वाले वर्षों में भारत विश्व का ग्रोथ इंजन होगा। यह इसलिए है क्योंकि भारत ने आपदा और मुश्किलों के समय को आर्थिक सुधार के अवसर में परिवर्तित किया। पिछले कुछ वर्षों में हमने मिशन मोड में जो रिफॉर्म्स किए हैं, उनसे भारत में ईज ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस में लगातार बढ़ोतरी हुई है। हमने कंप्लायंस बर्डन को कम किया है, रेड टेप को हटाकर रेड कारपेट बिछा रहे हैं। जीएसटी और इंसॉल्वेंसी एंड बेसिक कोड के लागू होने से इन्वेस्टर कॉन्फिडेंस बढ़ा है। रक्षा और अंतरिक्ष जैसे क्षेत्र जिनको प्रतिबंधित माना जाता था, आज प्राइवेट सेक्टर के लिए खोल दिए गए हैं। हमने पब्लिक सर्विस डिलीवरी और गुड गवर्नेंस पर विशेष रूप से ध्यान केंद्रित किया है। टेक्नोलॉजी के इस्तेमाल से भारत ने फाइनेंशियल इंक्लूजन की और एक बड़ी छलांग लगाई है। इसका सबसे अधिक लाभ हमारी ग्रामीण महिलाओं को मिला है। आज एक क्लिक से भारत में करोड़ों लोगों को डायरेक्ट बेनिफिट ट्रांसफर किए जाते हैं। अब तक $360 बिलियन से भी अधिक ऐसे ट्रांसफर किए जा चुके हैं। इससे सर्विस डिलीवरी में पारदर्शिता बढ़ी है और भ्रष्टाचार और मिडलमैन कम हुए हैं। प्रति गीगाबाइट डाटा की कीमत में भारत सबसे किफायती देशों में है। आज भारत में स्ट्रीट वेंडर से लेकर बड़े बड़े शॉपिंग मॉल तक यूपीआई यानी यूनिफाइड पेमेंट इंटरफेस का इस्तेमाल किया जाता है। आज विश्व के सबसे अधिक डिजिटल ट्रांजैक्शन वाला देश भारत है। यूएई, फ्रांस, सिंगापुर जैसे देश इस प्लेटफॉर्म के साथ जुड़े हैं। ब्रिक्स देशों के साथ भी इस पर काम करने के लिए अनेक संभावनाएं हैं। भारत के इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में बड़े पैमाने पर हो रहे निवेश से देश का परिदृश्य बदल रहा है। इस वर्ष के बजट में हमने इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के लिए लगभग $120 बिलियन का प्रावधान रखा है। इस निवेश के माध्यम से हम भविष्य के एक नए भारत की मजबूत नींव रख रहे हैं। रेल, रोड, वाटरवे, एयरवेज हर क्षेत्र में तेज गति से बदलाव आ रहा है। आज भारत में 10,000 किलोमीटर प्रति वर्ष की रफ्तार से नए हाईवे बन रहे हैं। पिछले 9 वर्ष में एयरपोर्ट की संख्या दोगुनी हुई है। निवेश और उत्पादन को बढ़ाने के लिए हमने प्रोडक्शन लिंक इंसेंटिव स्कीम्स लागू की हैं। लॉजिस्टिक्स कॉस्ट कम होने से भारत का मैन्युफैक्चरिंग सेक्टर कॉम्पिटिटिव हो रहा है। रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी के क्षेत्र में भारत वर्ल्ड लीडर में से एक है। हम भारत को सोलर एनर्जी, विंड एनर्जी, इलेक्ट्रिक व्हीकल्स, ग्रीन हाइड्रोजन, ग्रीन एमोनिया जैसे क्षेत्रों में ग्लोबल मैन्युफैक्चरिंग हब बनाने के लिए सक्रिय रूप से कदम उठा रहे हैं। स्वाभाविक है कि इससे भारत में रिन्यूएबल टेक्नोलॉजी का एक बड़ा मार्केट बनेगा। आज भारत में विश्व का तीसरा सबसे बड़ा स्टार्टअप इकोसिस्टम है। भारत में इस समय 100 से भी अधिक यूनिकॉर्न है। आईटी, टेलीकॉम, फिनटेक, एआई और सेमीकंडक्टर्स जैसे क्षेत्रों में हम मेक इन इंडिया, मेक फॉर द वर्ल्ड के विजन को आगे बढ़ा रहे हैं। इन सभी प्रयासों का सामान्य जन के जीवन पर प्रत्यक्ष रूप से सकारात्मक प्रभाव पड़ा है। पिछले 9 वर्षों में लोगों की आय में लगभग 3 गुना वृद्धि हुई है। भारत के आर्थिक विकास में महिलाओं की सशक्त भागीदारी रही है। आईटी से लेकर स्पेस तक, बैंकिंग से लेकर हेल्थ केयर तक महिलाएं पुरुषों के साथ कंधे से कंधा मिलाकर देश की प्रगति में योगदान दे रही है। भारत के लोगों ने 2047 तक एक विकसित राष्ट्र बनाने का संकल्प लिया है। फ्रेंड्स, मैं आप सभी को भारत की विकास यात्रा में शामिल होने के लिए आमंत्रित करता हूं। कोविड महामारी ने हमें रेजिलिएंट और इंक्लूसिव सप्लाई चेन्स के महत्व को सिखाया है। इसके लिए आपसी विश्वास और पारदर्शिता बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण है। हम एक दूसरे की ताकतों को जोड़कर पूरे विश्व, खासतौर पर ग्लोबल साउथ के कल्याण में महत्वपूर्ण योगदान दे सकते हैं। एक्सेलेंसी, मैं एक बार फिर ब्रिक्स बिजनेस जगत के लीडर्स को उनके योगदान के लिए बधाई देता हूं। इस मीटिंग के शानदार आयोजन के लिए मैं मेरे मित्र राष्ट्रपति रामाफोसा का भी आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Presented by is like before a big final like this. Maybe, I'm sure every chess player would be a little bit different too, but maybe that will give us a bit of an idea of how you prepare.
It's a lot of visualization. You're constantly thinking, where will he strike? What will he do? If I was sitting in his room right now and looking at my games, what would I aim at? You're trying to anticipate moves. You're trying to anticipate situations. You may also think, if we unexpectedly stumble on this, can I cope with the challenges? Will he be able to cope? Will I be able to cope? There's a lot of visualization going on, but equally you want to relive your past experiences in this situation and think, what are the things that went wrong? What are the things right? How do I close that gap? It's a lot of that. It's a lot of fretting and trying to guess. Because, if you guess correctly, that's 50% of the journey.
Yes. Could nerves be an issue because of the fact that, Prague is younger and less experienced than Magnus Carlsen, certainly as far as the stage is concerned?
Nerves are always decisive at a stage like this. Also, remember, both of them want this very badly.
Yes.
And they waited a long time for it. And I think, in fact, that is slightly harder for Magnus because he has missed the opportunity more often.
Yes.
So when he gets there, he really doesn't want to miss this time. And nerves will play an important part. In fact, there will be several mistakes. It's normal. Under the tension, both of them will wilt. There will be several mistakes and so on. But can you keep control after those mistakes? That will be the key.
In some ways, could it also be beneficial for Pragyananda that he's kind of the challenger here and the underdog?
Yes, I think he is clearly the underdog. And just like Caruana yesterday and the last 2 days, I expect his weakest area relative to them will be opening preparation. So he'll have to survive the opening, get into a position that he wants to play. The opening is where you decide what kind of game you're going to try and reach. He'll have to survive that phase. But if he does that, he's halfway there and then he has the chance to play well. But, it's mental, it's physical. Can he take 5 or 6 hours of hard work, hard calculation? Can he stand the strain of this big title? Again, big titles put a pressure on you. The closer you are, the harder it gets because it's easier for you to think, oh, I've reached, and then your attention flags. Never letting that thought come in. All these will be a big test against him on one of the biggest stages against a very big opponent.
I do want to ask you, regardless of what happens in this final, of course, all of us, I think 1 billion people are rooting for Pragyananda. He has already kind of achieved one important goal, which is, as you mentioned, playing in the Candidates 2024 to be the challenger to Lurin. Just how important is that, you think?
The Candidates is actually the goal of the World Cup. I mean, people play the World Cup to qualify for the Candidates. Carlsen is playing the World Cup because he has never won a knockout tournament. Slightly different motivation.
Yes.
But the Candidates is important because if you play in the Candidates, and that's a difficulty all its own, and if you can win that, then you get to play the World Championship. So for Prag, those are the more important goals. However, he is getting the chance to play a highly motivated opponent at a very, very big, on a very, very big stage. That kind of practice.
There is already a lot of talk about this final, particularly because Pragyananda has beaten Magnus Carlsen in previous events, and actually that's how he shot to fame in India as well. But before I get to that, after his semi-final win last evening, Pragyananda talked about how it's his defensive skills that have been saving him. He almost said that, he's been on the verge of losing a lot of these games, but somehow he sticks it out. What have you made of his journey so far and his chances in the final?
Look, chess is like many sports. You don't win only by the great moves. You win by the games you don't lose. Every half point plucked here and there adds to your score. So Pragyananda has done an amazing job. I would go further. Since June this year, he has played 3 events. He's played the Global Chess League, he played a tournament in Hungary, and now he's playing the FIDE World Cup. In all 3 events, he's playing unlike the Pragyananda even that we knew before, who was already one of the world's best juniors and one of the world's most promising talents. But in these 3 tournaments, he's raised his level enormously. But Carlsen is playing at one of his best levels too. So it's going to be challenging. Now, Pragyananda needed to rely on his defensive skills a lot against Caruana yesterday, because Caruana is one of the best players in the world, one of the best prepared players in the world, in openings especially. So Prag had to survive a lot of difficult positions, but he's been much more all-round. He beat Arjun, he beat some other players in the World Cup with his attacking skills. So he's been drawing from multiple skills as well. But he will be sorely tested by Carlsen, make no doubt about it.
Do you think some of his previous wins against Carlsen will make a difference mentally, at least for this 18-year-old, because this is a humongous stage for him. The first final he's made. In fact, a measure of his growth is from the fact that in the last World Cup, he was eliminated in the 4th round. And this time he's beaten the world number 2 and 3 en route to setting the date with the world number 1. Do you think it would help him that he has faced Magnus Carlsen multiple?
Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. India is all set for a moon landing. In less than 24 hours from now, the Chandrayaan 3 should land on the south pole of the moon. It will be a historic first, and the world is counting down, but they're only looking at this last